Joining me now to discuss the carnage in northern Gaza and America's support for Israel and the impending U.S. presidential election is Democratic Congressman Khanna of California's 17th District. Congressman, thank you for coming back on Mehdi Unfiltered. Let me start by what's happening in northern Gaza. The general's plan, quote unquote, which Netanyahu seems to have adopted and which Israel is believed to be currently implementing in northern Gaza, which says civilians have to either evacuate or die, which is using starvation basically as a weapon of war. That is fundamentally a violation of US and international law, is it not?
It's a violation of law to deny humanitarian aid. And let's just start with what happened to Shaban. I mean, this moved me more than probably any incident in the war. And maybe it's because I could relate to a 19-year-old with ambition who basically was desperate to get out of Gaza, appealed to the entire world. And the United States and the world let him down, burned to death because of a strike in a hospital area where his family was told to go take shelter. And it was just heartbreaking. And you hear this across Gaza. Now, we were just in Jordan, met with King Abdullah. He said they're trying to send trucks in to northern Gaza. We actually met with the prime minister as well, a bipartisan delegation. He's saying he's going to allow the trucks in, but we need to be very clear that the aid has to get in.
You were recently part of, as you say, a congressional delegation that met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. But, Congressman, you didn't attend his speech in Congress, but you did join this meeting with him. Why? What did you say to him? What do you think was achieved by meeting with him?
Well, I was part of a bipartisan, I'm a senior member of the House Armed Services Committee, and I think it's important for progressive voices to be in the room. And I was very, very candid with him. One thing that we did get a commitment on the 300 trucks that King Abdullah asked specifically to allow those trucks in with food. He said he would. Now we have to follow up. I also told him that he had lost young people. I said to him that, it may not impact you, but it's going to impact your successor 10 years from now. At which point he looked at me and he said, "Ro, what makes you think I'm not going to be here in 10 years? But he acknowledged the point that he's lost a lot of young people in America. The bigger issue was, and I hate the phrase day after. I said, what are we going to do to rebuild and heal? Because day after makes it seem like 40,000 dead and we can just move on. But what comes next? And my view very clearly was there cannot be an ongoing IDF presence. I made that clear. And that there has to be Palestinian voices with other Gulf allies in terms of a new civil administration.
Congressman, forget IDF presence. We're seeing settlement conferences going on in relation to northern Gaza, in featuring Netanyahu's own ministers saying it's our land, we're going to go build settlements there. Since Sinwar's killing, since the leader of Hamas's killing, American officials such as yourself have said, and Vice President Harris has said, use the killing to get a ceasefire, release the hostages, end the war. And yet Netanyahu's done the opposite. He has said, and I quote, "This is not the end of the war in Gaza." He's barred 6 medical NGOs from entering occupied Gaza. UNRWA has accused Israel of stopping aid deliveries to northern Gaza. That's all just since the killing of Sinwar. How does that reflect on you and Mike Rogers, the chairman of your committee? How does that reflect on you guys that, you go meet with this guy and he says all this stuff to you, but he doesn't care what the US government says to him. He does what he likes. It's what he's done for a year.
Well, I don't know if the 300 trucks, the Jordanian trucks, my understanding is
it's a drop in the ocean, Congressman. You know that, given the situation in northern Gaza.
Yeah, but at least there's something. I mean, that was what King Abdullah asked for. Look, I am for having much less of a blank check to Netanyahu. As you know, I voted against the offensive weapons. As you know, I've called for the enforcement of the Leahy law and making sure that we're enforcing United States law. I said that the vice president should just say that when she's president, she's going to make sure that U.S. law is enforced. So if you're asking me, should the United States have done more and should we do more to hold Netanyahu accountable? The answer is absolutely yes.
Did you do more in that meeting? Did you and the congressional delegation talk about any kind of leverage that the U.S. has? I mean, the United States is funding this war, is arming this war. Netanyahu cannot do what he's doing without support from a Democratic White House and a Republican-led Congress. Did you guys talk at all about any kind of leverage or conditions or any kind of pressure? Or does he just have a blank check? You say you're against a blank check, but I just think someone like yourself, when you go into a meeting with Netanyahu, what do you have? You can't threaten him with anything because your political system, your Congress, your party in the White House doesn't want to threaten him with anything.
And he knows that. I mean, that's why he knew that I was opposed to giving him more offensive weapons. And if I were to say, look, we're going to continue to not give you offensive weapons, he'd say, Ro, you were on the losing end of that vote. You had 37.
But that's humiliating, is it not, for a member of Congress to be told by the Prime Minister of basically a client state that I can do whatever I want?
Well, I think what he understands, and two things. One, what he understands is, and I was surprised that he understood that they do have an issue with the next generation of Americans, and they do care about that. But the other thing he understands is that they have actually inflamed the sentiment for the Palestinian cause in places like Saudi Arabia and Jordan. And the reality, one of the things that surprised me is that the Saudis were pretty direct with me in that they were willing to overlook the Palestinian cause prior to October 7th, but now that is impossible. And the Jordanians have said that the sympathy for the Palestinian cause has increased dramatically given all of the deaths in Gaza and in Lebanon. And Israel desperately wants normalization with the Saudis. They desperately want more integration. And I think that is the point of leverage of convening these Gulf states with the Palestinians, not having Saudi Arabia run Gaza. That's ridiculous. But to say that, if you want that normalization, you need a Palestinian state.
Congressman, you began the interview saying you believe that what Israel is doing is in violation of international law in northern Gaza. If the International Criminal Court approves the chief prosecutor's request for an arrest warrant against Benjamin Netanyahu in the coming weeks, the Biden administration, Republicans in Congress will come out and they'll oppose it. They'll condemn it. They'll slam the ICC. But I do wonder, what about you? You're a supporter of international law. You're a progressive. Would you support an ICC arrest warrant for Netanyahu for all his clear war crimes in Gaza?
Well, here's why. Look, I think that the International Criminal Court should do its work, but I don't think what I want to do is move to peace. The same reason I wouldn't have supported, even though I disagreed, George W. Bush's war in Iraq. I don't think he should have gone to be tried in International Criminal Court. I think what we need is a truth and reconciliation movement that moves us forward, and that is actually, you need Israeli support ultimately to get a Palestinian state. And so do I think that they should have findings? Yes. But do I think arresting the head of state of Israel is going to move us any closer to a Palestinian state? No, I don't.
Yeah, it might not move us close to a Palestinian state, but it would be accountability for war crimes as other leaders have had to face. But Israel gets an exception. The US is playing a key role in coordinating with Israel on their response to Iran's missile attack from earlier this month. There's even been reporting that the US might join in with an Israeli attack on Iran and call it self-defense. Surely that would be illegal under US law, unconstitutional. Surely Congress should vote on whether the United States goes to war with Iran?
Absolutely. And I do not think the United States should in any way join an attack on Iran. The other thing is we don't want to have a war with Iran, but Israel doesn't want to have a war with Iran. I mean, as you know, Iran is a 1 million-person army. Iran has more ballistic missiles than the Iron Dome, David Sling, and Arrow combined. So it would be foolhardy for Israel to get into a full-scale confrontation with Iran, which is why I'm hopeful that any retaliation is not going to hit the nuclear sites or the oil fields. And the United States should be involved in trying to limit what that retaliation looks like, and then through black channels, making sure that Iran doesn't retaliate. We have an interest in preventing a regional war, but absolutely not. There's only one person probably cheering for a war in Iran for the United States to be involved, and that's Lindsey Graham. I don't think you're going to get support even from any Republicans for that.
I think once it happens, you'll see the US political class fall into line, including Joe Biden, sadly. I believe you're heading for Michigan to campaign for the vice president. Just a very simple question. Is Kamala Harris going to lose Michigan over her support for the genocide in Gaza and the attack on Lebanon?
It's a close race. It's a coin toss. I think the issue, she would be winning if it weren't for what's happening in Gaza. I do think that it's important that we start with understanding the loss of Palestinian lives, of lives in Gaza, of lives in Lebanon, are matter just as much or just as tragic as the loss of Israeli lives. And, there's some comments recently saying that one is most tragic, which as if there is a hierarchy of empathy.
That was the vice president's comment. You're saying that was a mistake, right?
Well, yes. I don't think she believes that, but the way that came out could convey to someone that there's a differential in the loss of life. A loss of life is a loss of life. Shaban's being burned alive when he asked for the world to save him is just as horrific as a young person who was attending a concert in Israel and was shot to death by Hamas. Life is life.
So let me ask you this. You said that she would be in the lead in Michigan if it wasn't for Gaza. I think most people who look at the polls, anyone who's spoken to anyone in Detroit or Dearborn recently knows that's probably the case. And yet, they're not shifting, even though they could be ahead. Does the Harris campaign, Congressman, not know that huge numbers of Arab Americans, Muslim Americans, young voters, progressives in Michigan are planning on sitting out this election or voting for Jill Stein? Or does the Harris campaign just not care that they think maybe they can win without those groups? What is going on inside the campaign? I don't understand. Please explain to us.
I think they're hopeful that people will realize that with Vice President Harris, as you yourself have pointed out, there is some hope for change, that you're going to have a new team in there, you're going to have a new moment, and that you could get, she's talked about Palestinian self-determination more than any presidential candidate in the past, and that there is at least some possibility of change, which you're not going to get with Donald Trump, and that argument will carry the day. Of course, I have been of the view that she needs to make a bigger break from Joe Biden. I have not just on Gaza, on 3-4 key issues.
Yes.
And all she had to say was, you've had 1 year. The hostages still aren't released. You've had 40,000 plus people, civilians died. No one can look at that and say that foreign policy for a year has been a success. Of course it hasn't been a success. I'm going to have a new direction. I'm going to have a new team, and I'm going to make sure that we bring an end to the war. Even without the specificity, just saying that in an acknowledgement that there's been a failure of policy, I think would go a long way.
So I obviously think Donald Trump would be worse, both for America and the Middle East, than Kamala Harris. Having said that, I also would never ask, and I don't think a Michigan voter who's lost family in the Middle East should have to be asked to vote for a candidate, for a woman who refuses to budge, as you admit, even the slightest, on Gaza. So, Congressman, you're going to Michigan. Why should a voter in Michigan who's lost multiple family members in Israel's genocidal attack on Gaza, an attack using US weapons, why should they vote for a candidate who says, I'm not going to budge on this issue, I'm going to continue the Biden policy, I'm going to continue arms sales? Why should they vote for Kamala Harris on November the 5th? How do you persuade someone in that situation to vote for Kamala Harris?
I understand that the cause of Palestinian self-determination has been denied since 1948. I understand that the United States policy has basically been largely an unconditional support of Israel without concern, an adequate concern for Palestinian statehood. I mean, there are exceptions where you had Jim Baker, you had Clinton tribe. I understand that. But what I would say to people is, look, you have, for the first time, a presidential candidate who said we need a Palestinian state. You have a moment where you now have Saudi Arabia, Jordan, other Gulf allies saying we can't normalize further in the case of Saudi at all, or in the case of Jordan, we can't continue to deepen the relationship unless you have resolved this issue. And you have young people, largely in the Democratic Party, saying we need justice there. And my point is, look, we can move the ball forward.
With respect, that's all kind of hypothetical. We can move the ball forward, abstract geopolitics, Saudi Arabia, two-state solution. I'm talking about a voter in Michigan who is literally losing family members by the day in Gaza or Lebanon, thanks to arms that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden are sending. How do you say to that person, we'll vote for these people, even though they carry on sending arms? They're happy to carry on sending arms to kill your family.
I understand the grief. I understand the emotion. I still understand the anger. I understand the desire to send a message to say, look, if you're going to do this, we're going to penalize you. But I say, look at, that's your emotion. That's your heart. But there's also got to be the logic in the head. And if you want to do that, then know that for the next 4 years, you're going to have more unconditional support for Netanyahu, and you're going to have less chances at all to move the peace process forward with Palestine. Now, I'm not going to, it's their decision. I'm certainly not going to morally lecture or condemn them. I'm just going to try to gently persuade them that to choose the logic in the head over their heart.
But
I understand.
But you understand it would be easier for someone like you to persuade Kamala Harris to shift course on arms sales than tell a voter they need to vote for someone who won't shift course on arms sales, right? It would be easier for you to have that gentle nudge to Harris rather than the voters.
Well, I haven't just been gentle. I went on Meet the Press saying she should call for a new direction, and I don't even think she needs to do what I did, which is to vote against more offensive weapons or go that far. I think she could just say, I understand that we have not done enough to enforce the Leahy Law or United States Security Assistance Law.
Yes.
And in my administration, we're going to enforce that.
Exactly.
And in my administration, we're going to have a different approach to holding Netanyahu accountable.
You said she should break with Biden. Forget breaking with Biden. What about her embrace of Republicans? Is it wise, Congressman, to be campaigning with Liz Cheney in Michigan, of all places, while Donald Trump is putting out rather savvy statements, I hate to say, attacking Cheney and her dad and saying there'll be no wars in the Middle East on his watch, and so Muslims there should vote for him?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of that strategy. I got to tell you. I mean, look, I respect what Liz Cheney did in speaking out on January 6th, but Liz Cheney, not just because she's the daughter of Dick Cheney, her own views. I mean, I was on the Armed Services Committee with her, is extraordinarily hawkish on our policies in the Middle East and getting us more involved. And I don't think that that's the winning strategy, certainly in a state like Michigan. I mean, if there are certain other states where suburbs where she wants to go, fine. But I wouldn't make the closing argument that Liz Cheney is going to have a prominent role in a future Harris administration.
So, Congressman, just switching tack, it's not just Arab Americans who are upset with the Harris campaign over an issue of foreign policy. So too are some Pakistani Americans. The Pakistani American PAC recently announced their endorsement of Donald Trump, saying the Biden-Harris administration hasn't done enough for imprisoned former Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan. You responded to that news by urging Vice President Harris to take a stand on democracy in Pakistan and on the freeing of Imran Khan. Why hasn't she done that? Is it because the Biden-Harris administration was in fact happy to see Imran Khan toppled and imprisoned and may well have played a direct role in that coup?
I don't believe that. I mean, I know there are people who believe Donald Lu or others had some role in the coup because Pakistan wasn't sufficiently supportive of our policy on Ukraine. I don't believe that. But what I do believe is that we have not been clear enough in not recognizing that election, in calling for the freeing of Imran Khan, in saying that there need to be new elections, and are sort of content to allow the status quo to continue and have not taken a strong enough position. And the vice president, she's been part of the administration. She's a loyal person. She doesn't want to undermine the president. But I think at some point, someone on her team should have gone to the president and said, here are the 3-4 ways that we're going to break from you on foreign policy and domestic policy. And it's not personal. It's just what the vice president believes.
You recently said in an interview, Congressman, with CNN that the Democrats could have had Elon Musk on their side had they, quote, celebrated him more, and that he, quote, felt offended by the lack of support from the Democratic Party. Come on, Congressman. Elon Musk is currently trying to buy votes for Trump. He's pushing racist, anti-Semitic, election denial conspiracy theories online. He's turned Twitter into a playground for neo-Nazis and white supremacists. He's made jokes about killing Kamala Harris. He said awful things about Paul Pelosi when he was attacked. He's vying for a cabinet job under Donald Trump. You think all of that could have been avoided if Joe Biden had just been nicer to him? Come on.
Well, first of all, he doesn't want to be in the cabinet. I mean, he's going and making billions of dollars and putting things.
He's going to get a big government job from Trump, apparently.
I'd be surprised if he does that. But there are other reasons that he may benefit. But look, my point was this: he was an Obama supporter for 8 years. He was a Hillary Clinton supporter. So what made him leave the party? There are multiple reasons. One was
Twitter, radicalizing online, red pilling himself.
Certainly, but the idea that we would not invite him to a summit on electric vehicles. And I have been a strong supporter. Tesla's in my district in Fremont. I've been a strong supporter that they should unionize. And I, from day one, and I've been a strong point that Obama gave him the money for Tesla to survive.
Yes.
So, but that doesn't mean that you don't recognize that what he did on electric vehicles was important. And you know a lot of these people who are billionaires and entrepreneurs, and
they're thin-skinned egomaniacs.
Self-importance. Their sense of self-importance. And what happens?
But should the Democratic Party have to indulge a billionaire that thin-skinned who turns out to be the racist we always suspected he was?
Well, I think in politics, you want to build by addition, not subtraction. And my view is that you don't compromise your ideals. You know, if Elon Musk were to say, "Ro, I want you to say that Tesla shouldn't unionize," or "I want you to say that we shouldn't have a wealth tax," or "I want you to say that
he is saying all that, Congressman. He is literally now campaigning for Trump in Pennsylvania, pushing some of the most right-wing policy proposals and culture wars BS that we've seen for a long time. He is a hardcore right-wing Republican. I'm not sure why you just said that Harris shouldn't be with Cheney. Why are you with Musk?
Well, I'm not with Musk. I disagree with a lot of those points, and I've called him out on those points, not just publicly, but privately. I've said to him, you know, I strongly disagree with some of these places that you've gone, and I've said, you know, some of the tweets are childish and
not just childish, anti-Semitic, Islamophobic, racist. Let's be clear.
And inflammatory. I said, and you know, and I criticize him. I mean, I'm not. But you asked me, how did we get to this point, and how do we get back? And I think it would be, but it would be naive for us to think that the party doesn't have an issue with young men across the country. Now, how do we get them back, and how do we make sure that we are seen as a party that champions entrepreneurship and innovation while also standing for fairness? I think is a longer conversation. But I don't think this thing is about. I'm certainly not going to defend Elon Musk giving $1 million to people to sign a petition or the comments he's made, and strongly
I mean, he should be.
Disagree with
I don't know why he's not being investigated by your Department of Justice. Let me ask you this on the economy. You mentioned entrepreneurship. Musk's pick for president, Donald Trump, was recently pictured at a McDonald's serving fries and burgers and smiles to a bunch of customers who turned out to be hand-picked supporters of his, and the McDonald's was actually closed. Put aside the fact that Trump is a con man, and that was a stunt. The imagery does cut through to ordinary Americans, to working Americans. Why do you think that is, that on the economy, the party of billionaires and oligarchs and tax cuts for the rich is able to do a better job of sounding populist and on the side of the little guy than the Democrats, who objectively have better policies for the little guy?
It's the most frustrating thing. I mean, I tweeted out afterwards, Donald Trump doesn't believe in a $15 wage. He doesn't care about the wages of these folks, but it was a winning photo op. You know, it reminded me of an article in Time magazine that was a total takedown of Ronald Reagan, and Reagan's press secretary thanked the journalist, and the journalist said, "Why? That article made the president look terrible." He said, "Well, the picture had Reagan with a flag landing, and that's all people look at." And you know, we need to do a better job of the imagery of politics and of going to steel plants and having the president or vice president stand and having the steel plant come up and understanding how people process information. And you know, if the campaign is one of images and symbolism, we as a party haven't been as good at it. And that's the reason the race is as close.
So last question, then, let's be very explicit. If you were running the Harris-Walz campaign, what one thing would you do differently between now and November the 5th?
Well, let me say two things. One, I would have looked for 3 places that I would have broken clearly from President Biden substantively. I mean, just saying, look, you're for more home care workers and Medicare. I love that policy, but come on, that's not Biden would be for that. I mean, the question is, where are you going to really philosophically in your soul be different than Joe Biden? I would have 3 clear ways that that's the case. And then I would have been on factory floors and union halls across the battleground states in spontaneous moments, talking about what Biden has brought, what you're going to bring, and why you'd be much better than Donald Trump.
Congressman Khanna, I know you're heading to Michigan. Let's see how it works out for you. Thank you so much for taking time out today. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mehdi. Always a challenging interview, but always fair.
Thank you. Did you like this video? Don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel and turn on notifications. For exclusive content and to support our independent, unfiltered journalism, head over to zeteo.com. Your support matters.